The early morning air was cold and sharp as Samuel moved quietly through the forest. He was a young trapper who had spent many years learning the ways of the wilderness. He knew the land well, the hidden paths, the secret places where animals liked to roam. Autumn had arrived, painting the leaves in red, orange, and gold, and Samuel loved this time of year. The crisp air made him feel awake, alive, and alert. He carried his pack on his back, filled with simple tools, food, and some spare clothes. His traps were spread across the woods, carefully placed near the paths that animals often took. He had set them yesterday and was now returning to check them, hoping to find some rabbits or maybe a fox. Samuel was careful. He knew that this land bordered the Apache territory and he respected them. He had heard stories of conflict between settlers and the Apache, and though he wanted to avoid trouble, he also knew the forest did not belong to him. He moved softly, stepping over fallen branches and through thick patches of moss. The sunlight barely touched the ground, filtering through the high trees, making the forest feel magical but also mysterious. Every sound, the rustling of leaves, the snapping of twigs, or the distant call of a bird kept him alert. When he reached his first trap, he crouched down slowly. His eyes widened in surprise. Instead of the usual small animal, there was a movement that made his heart skip a beat. A young girl, no older than 12 or 13, was caught in the trap. Her foot was tangled in the metal and she struggled, her small hands pulling at the snare, but the more she pulled, the tighter it seemed to grip. Her dark hair fell over her face, hiding her features for a moment, and when she looked up, her eyes were wide with terror. Samuel froze. He had never seen a human in a trap before, and certainly not a child. His mind raced. How had she ended up here? Was she hurt? He knew that if he moved too quickly, she might panic and hurt herself. He also realized that if anyone from her tribe saw him, there could be misunderstandings. But he could not leave her there. That was unthinkable. Slowly, Samuel spoke, his voice calm and gentle. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you," he said, keeping his hands in view so she would not feel threatened. The girl flinched at his voice and backed away slightly, trying to pull her foot free at the same time. She whispered something he did not understand, her voice trembling with fear. He smiled softly, trying to reassure her. He reached slowly for the trap, careful not to startle her. It took patience and steady hands, but Samuel managed to release the metal catch, freeing her foot from the trap. The girl collapsed to the ground, her chest rising and falling as she tried to catch her breath. She looked at Samuel, her dark eyes still filled with fear, and whispered more words in her language. He shook his head, signaling that he did not understand, but his tone was gentle, filled with kindness. After a moment, he offered her some water from his flask. The girl hesitated, glancing at him suspiciously. Slowly, curiosity overcame fear, and she took a small sip, holding the cup tightly with both hands. She drank cautiously, making sure she did not spill a drop. Samuel watched her carefully, ensuring she was unharmed. Her lips trembled as she swallowed, but she seemed to appreciate the gesture. Samuel then reached into his pack and took out a piece of bread. He held it out to her, still keeping his distance. The girl looked at it, unsure whether to accept it. Hunger, however, was stronger than fear. She took the bread with delicate fingers, taking small bites, her eyes never leaving Samuel's face. She was still cautious, but slowly her breathing steadied, and she seemed to realize that this man, though a stranger, meant her no harm. The girl's clothes were simple, made of soft leather, and they were slightly torn and dirty from her time in the forest. She had scratches on her arms and legs from the branches and undergrowth, but none seemed serious. Samuel wanted to help her further, but he knew he had to be careful. Any sudden move could frighten her, and any misunderstanding could turn dangerous. He waited patiently, letting her finish the bread and drink more water, all while speaking softly, explaining in words she might understand that he would not hurt her. Hours passed slowly as Samuel walked beside her, keeping a respectful distance. He guided her gently along the forest path, showing her how to step over hidden roots and navigate around thorny bushes. Every now and then he would point to tracks in the ground, teaching her how to read them, showing her the path of rabbits and deer. She listened, fascinated, and a small smile occasionally flickered on her lips. Though still cautious, she began to trust him a little. As they walked, the girl spoke in her language, telling Samuel small things about herself. Her voice was quiet, hesitant, but he could sense the words held important meaning. Samuel nodded and smiled, encouraging her to continue. Even though he could not understand her words, he could see the meaning in her gestures, the way her eyes shone with emotion, and the way her body relaxed slightly when she felt safe. They reached a small stream, its water sparkling in the sunlight that had finally begun to pierce through the tree canopy. Samuel offered her a chance to wash her hands and face. She did so slowly, the water cool and refreshing on her skin. He handed her a small cloth to dry her face. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting both caution and gratitude. It was a fragile trust, but it existed, and Samuel knew that it would take time to grow stronger. Samuel decided it was best to continue moving, but carefully. He did not want to stay in one place for too long, as danger could be near. He stayed alert, scanning the forest in all directions. Birds flew overhead, and the rustling of leaves hinted at unseen creatures, but Samuel remained calm. He spoke softly to the girl, pointing out sounds, teaching her to listen to the forest, to understand the signs around them. She began to follow his lead, stepping lightly, listening closely, and even pointing out small birds or animals she noticed along the path. By the time the sun was higher in the sky, the girl had begun to relax in Samuel's presence. She was still wary, but she no longer flinched at every movement. She walked a little closer, keeping pace with him, and occasionally glanced at him with a hint of trust in her eyes. Samuel, for his part, felt a sense of responsibility that went beyond mere survival. He had found her in danger, and he knew it was his duty to protect her until she was safe. They found a small clearing, and Samuel motioned for her to rest. He sat on a fallen log, keeping his posture non-threatening, and watched her drink from the stream. She took her time, enjoying the moment, and Samuel could see that the girl's fear was slowly turning into cautious hope. He spoke to her gently, explaining that they would make it to her home, that he would not leave her alone in the forest again. The girl finally spoke more clearly, pointing toward a direction in the distance. Samuel nodded, understanding that she was indicating the way to her village or a familiar path. He smiled softly, encouraging her to follow. Step by step they moved together, Samuel remaining patient, guiding her carefully, and teaching her small lessons about the forest as they walked. Even though the forest was full of unknown dangers, Samuel's calm presence made her feel safe. She began to believe that not everyone outside her tribe was a threat, that sometimes kindness could appear in the most unexpected places. The fear that had gripped her heart when she first fell into the trap was slowly replaced with a fragile sense of trust, and she realized that she could rely on this man to help her return home safely. As the day went on, the forest seemed less intimidating. The sounds of animals became familiar, and the sunlight warmed the air around them. Samuel and the girl moved together step by step, carefully avoiding obstacles, always alert but calm. In that quiet companionship, a bond began to form, a bond built on trust, patience, and the understanding that even in a world that could be harsh and dangerous, moments of genuine care could make all the difference. By late afternoon, they had traveled a considerable distance. The girl, though still cautious, began to walk a little faster, her energy returning as she realized she would survive this day. Samuel, too, felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that his careful actions had saved her from fear and potential harm. He continued to guide her, keeping his tone soft, his movements slow and deliberate, ensuring that she felt safe every step of the way. As the shadows grew longer, the girl paused for a moment and looked up at Samuel. There was a small smile on her face, hesitant but real. It was a sign that, despite everything, she had begun to trust him. Samuel returned the smile, feeling the weight of responsibility lighten slightly. He knew that the journey ahead would still be challenging, but for now, they had survived the first day together, and the bond they were forming would carry them through the trials yet to come. The sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, when Samuel and the Apache girl continued their journey through the forest. The girl's small hands clutched a piece of cloth she had used to dry her face earlier, and her eyes constantly scanned the surroundings. Though she had begun to trust Samuel a little, caution was still in every movement she made. She had grown up hearing stories of strangers and dangers beyond her village, and the memory of being trapped lingered sharply in her mind. Samuel walked a few steps behind her, careful to give her space. He understood the need for patience. Trust, especially in someone so young and in a situation like this, could not be rushed. As they moved through a narrow trail lined with tall trees, He occasionally pointed to footprints in the dirt, showing her how to recognize tracks left by deer or rabbits. The girl watched closely, her brow furrowed in concentration, and Samuel smiled quietly to himself. She was eager to learn, and even in fear, her curiosity shone through. At one point, a small squirrel darted across the path. The girl gasped softly and instinctively reached for Samuel, but he gently stopped her, shaking his head with a reassuring smile. "It's okay," he said softly. "It won't hurt you." He crouched down, motioning for her to watch, and the squirrel quickly scampered up a tree. The girl laughed softly, a sound that was almost musical in the quiet of the forest. Samuel's heart lifted slightly at the sound. It was the first real sign that she was beginning to feel a sense of safety, even if only a little. As they walked, Samuel offered her more food from his pack. There were small pieces of dried meat and some berries he had collected earlier. The girl took the food hesitantly, her dark eyes meeting his as if seeking reassurance that it was safe. Samuel nodded and smiled, encouraging her to eat. She chewed slowly, savoring the taste and beginning to relax further in his presence. They moved carefully, step by step, avoiding thorns and roots, and slowly, the girl began to speak a few words in her language, pointing toward things she recognized: a bird, a tree, or a rock. Samuel listened attentively, nodding and smiling, showing her that her words mattered even if he did not understand them fully. The forest was alive with sounds, and Samuel took the opportunity to teach her to listen. "Hear that?" he whispered, pointing to a distant rustle in the leaves. "That's a rabbit moving through the underbrush. And that the bird singing above is a warning. The forest tells its story if you know how to listen." The girl leaned closer, her curiosity sparking as she tried to imitate his careful listening. For the first time that day, she felt a small connection to the forest, not as a place of danger, but as a living world that could be understood and respected. Hours passed slowly. The sun sank lower and shadows began to stretch across the forest floor. Samuel noticed that the girl's small feet were tired and offered to carry her pack for her. She hesitated, glancing at him with uncertainty. He smiled and shook his head gently as if to say, "It's okay. I'm helping, not taking." Slowly, she allowed him to take the pack, and he hoisted it onto his back, feeling its weight and adjusting his pace to match hers. During a brief rest, Samuel and the girl sat near a large tree, its roots twisting like ancient fingers into the ground. Samuel pointed to a small pool of water nearby and motioned for her to drink. The girl kneeled carefully, cupping the water in her hands, and drank slowly. Samuel watched her, making sure she was safe, and then drank from his own flask. The moment was quiet, peaceful, and yet filled with a tension that neither of them could completely escape. As the sky shifted into deeper shades of orange and pink, Samuel noticed the girl beginning to relax more. She even began to speak a few more words, telling him small stories about her life, her family, and the land she knew. Though he could not understand the words fully, he could feel the meaning in her gestures and the tone of her voice. Each word, each motion was a bridge connecting them. Slowly replacing fear with cautious trust, they continued their journey, moving through a part of the forest where the trees were older, taller, and closer together. The light was fading, and Samuel knew they would need to find a safe place to rest for the night soon. He led the girl to a small clearing where the ground was soft and there were no immediate dangers nearby. Samuel gathered dry leaves and branches to make a small safe area for the girl to sit. He then built a small fire, careful to keep it controlled, knowing that its warmth would comfort her and provide some light as night approached. The girl watched him work, her eyes wide with wonder. She had seen fires before, of course, but the way Samuel built it, slowly, carefully, with respect for the forest, made her feel safe. She sat near the edge of the clearing, wrapped in her small cloak, and watched the flames dance. Samuel offered her more food, and she accepted it without hesitation this time. The simple act of eating together, sitting near the fire, helped solidify the trust that was growing between them. As night fell, Samuel spoke softly, telling her that he would keep watch and that she could rest. She leaned against a tree, her body relaxing for the first time in hours. Samuel sat nearby, alert, scanning the forest for any signs of danger. The sounds of the night were different from the day, the rustle of nocturnal animals, the occasional call of an owl, and the whisper of the wind through the trees. The girl listened carefully, and Samuel explained what some of the sounds might mean, teaching her to understand the forest even in darkness. The girl began to share small stories of her life with him. She spoke of her family, the daily tasks she performed, and the games she played with other children in her village. Samuel listened patiently, asking questions when appropriate, and she answered in her language, pointing to things around her to make her meaning clear. Though he could not understand every word, the stories helped him understand her world, her fears, and her joys. It also helped the girl feel seen and heard, an important step in overcoming the trauma of being trapped earlier that day. Hours passed, and the girl's fear slowly gave way to a quiet sense of safety. She began to fall asleep near the fire, her body finally relaxing as the warmth seeped into her bones. Samuel stayed awake, keeping watch through the night, making sure that nothing disturbed their camp. He thought about the events of the day, about how a single trap had changed the course of this girl's life and his own. He realized that trust, patience, and kindness could create bonds even in the most unexpected circumstances. Before dawn, the girl stirred slightly, but did not wake fully. Samuel quietly packed up their belongings, keeping movements slow and calm, and prepared for the next day's journey. He knew that returning her safely to her village would require more care and attention, but for now the girl was safe, and that was what mattered most. As the first light of morning touched the forest, Samuel looked down at the girl, her eyes still closed, and felt a deep sense of responsibility. He had promised to protect her, and he would keep that promise. The bond between them, fragile but real, had grown stronger over the day and night. She had begun to trust him, and he had grown to care for her well-being deeply. The journey ahead would not be easy. There were dangers in the forest, and misunderstandings could arise if the wrong people saw them together. But Samuel felt confident that with patience, care, and respect, he could guide her safely home. And the girl, though still cautious, had learned that sometimes strangers could show the greatest kindness, and that fear could turn into trust when met with patience and understanding. With a deep breath, Samuel stood and offered his hand to the girl. She took it cautiously, but with a small nod she agreed to continue the journey. Together, step by step, they moved through the forest, the bond between them growing stronger with each passing moment. The sun rose higher, casting golden light on their path, and the day promised hope, safety, and the possibility of friendship where there had once been fear. The morning air was crisp as Samuel and the Apache girl continued their journey deeper into the forest. The first light of dawn filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the path. Birds called from the treetops and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. The girl, now a little more relaxed than the previous day, walked beside Samuel, her steps careful but steady. Though still cautious, she had begun to trust him, and each small smile she offered made Samuel feel a quiet warmth inside. They moved slowly, following the trail that Samuel believed would lead them closer to her village. The forest, though familiar to Samuel, was vast and full of hidden dangers. Rocks, uneven ground, and tangled roots made each step a careful consideration. He noticed the girl occasionally stumble and would reach out instinctively, not to grab her but to steady her balance if needed. She began to rely on him quietly, appreciating his presence even without words. As they walked, Samuel spoke softly about the forest, sharing knowledge that had taken him years to learn. "See that tree there?" he said, pointing to a tall oak with rough bark. "Its roots run deep, holding the soil together. Animals often come near for food and water. If you know the signs, you can find them without getting lost." The girl nodded, listening carefully. She began to imitate his observations, looking for tracks in the soil, small marks on tree trunks, and the way the wind shifted the branches. Samuel smiled quietly, impressed with her attentiveness. Around midday, they reached a small creek. Samuel knelt beside it and gestured for the girl to do the same. The water was clear and cold, tumbling over smooth stones and reflecting the sky above. The girl dipped her hands into the water, splashing gently on her face. Samuel handed her a small cloth to dry her face, and she accepted it, glancing at him with a faint smile. For a moment, the forest felt peaceful, almost as if the dangers that lurked around them did not exist. They ate a small meal of bread and berries sitting near the creek. The girl's hands were still small and delicate, and she handled the food with care, taking small bites as Samuel spoke softly, telling her not to worry. Though she did not fully understand his words, his tone conveyed kindness and safety. She listened closely, nodding at his gestures and even laughed softly at the way he mimicked the movements of a rabbit as it hopped near the water. After eating, they continued their journey. Samuel noticed that the girl's steps were becoming steadier, her movements less fearful. She began to point out signs in the forest herself. A broken branch that indicated an animal had passed, a patch of berries that looked safe to eat, or a distant bird warning them of a predator nearby. Samuel encouraged her, praising her awareness and quiet wisdom. Each word of encouragement built her confidence, helping her feel that she was capable and strong, even in the vast forest. The day wore on, and the shadows grew longer as the sun began to descend. Samuel knew they were approaching the territory near her village, but he also knew that this area could be watched by Apache scouts. Any misunderstanding could be dangerous. He slowed his pace, scanning the surroundings carefully. The girl noticed his change in speed and quieted herself, understanding that caution was necessary. Samuel gestured for her to follow closely, and she did, trusting his judgment. As they approached a small clearing, they heard voices in the distance. Samuel froze, listening carefully. The girl's body tensed beside him, and he could see the fear in her eyes. He whispered for her to stay calm and crouch low. From the trees, they saw a group of Apache scouts moving along a trail. Samuel remained still, showing no signs of fear or aggression. The girl watched him closely, realizing how calm he was even when danger was near. The scouts paused near the edge of the clearing, looking around. Samuel slowly raised his hands, showing he meant no harm. He spoke softly, though he knew the scouts could not understand his words. The girl remained silent, observing the situation carefully. After a tense moment, the scouts moved on, apparently satisfied that no threat was present. The girl exhaled quietly, relief washing over her. She realized that Samuel had protected her, showing courage and wisdom in a situation where fear could have taken over. They continued their journey, moving through the forest with heightened awareness. Samuel taught the girl how to move quietly, how to listen to the sounds of the forest for signs of danger, and how to use the natural surroundings to stay safe. The girl absorbed each lesson, her fear slowly giving way to a quiet sense of capability. She began to see Samuel not just as a protector, but as a teacher, someone who could guide her safely through the unknown. By late afternoon, they reached a ridge that overlooked part of the village. The girl paused, her eyes widening as she caught sight of familiar rooftops and smoke rising from chimneys. She pointed excitedly, her voice rising in her language, and Samuel nodded, understanding that they were close. He smiled gently, offering her a hand, which she took cautiously. Together they began to descend the ridge, careful with each step, knowing that the village could be welcoming or suspicious depending on how they approached. As they neared the outskirts, villagers began to notice movement in the trees. Samuel slowed, ensuring the girl remained calm. He gestured for her to stay low and moved slightly ahead, making sure the path was clear. The girl's heart raced, but she trusted him completely now. She realized that the fear she had felt when trapped in the snare had been replaced by something new: hope. When they finally reached the village clearing, the girl's family came running, calling her name. Samuel stepped back, giving them space. The girl ran forward, embracing her mother and father, tears streaming down her cheeks. She turned briefly to Samuel, her eyes filled with gratitude. Though words were not needed, the look on her face conveyed everything she felt: relief, joy, and deep appreciation. The girl's parents spoke quickly, in their language, and Samuel listened, understanding that they were asking questions. He gestured to explain that he had found her trapped and had guided her safely home. After a moment of careful discussion, the parents nodded and allowed Samuel to stay, inviting him to sit near the edge of the clearing. The girl stayed close to her family but glanced back at Samuel, feeling a connection that had grown over the past 2 days. As evening approached, the village elders came to speak with Samuel. They asked questions, cautious but curious. Samuel explained simply and respectfully, showing that his intentions had been pure. The elders, after assessing his demeanor and sincerity, accepted his story. They recognized that he had acted with care and courage, protecting the girl when she was vulnerable. It was rare for an outsider to gain such trust, and Samuel had done so with patience and kindness. The girl, now fully safe, began to share small details of her experience with her family. She spoke of the fear she had felt, the kindness she had seen in Samuel, and the lessons he had taught her. Her parents listened intently, grateful for the young trapper who had shown respect and courage. Samuel watched quietly, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. He had set out that morning to check traps and had instead formed a bond that would leave a lasting impact on this girl's life. That night, as the village settled into quiet, Samuel prepared to leave. The girl came to him, holding a small bundle of food and a piece of cloth for his pack. She smiled, a full, warm smile that showed trust and gratitude. Samuel accepted the gifts, feeling honored. Though their journey together had been short, the bond they shared was strong. He had shown her that strangers could be kind, and she had shown him the strength of resilience and trust. As he walked away from the village, Samuel looked back one last time. The girl was watching him, her eyes bright in the fading light. He knew that this moment and the lessons they had shared would remain with both of them forever. The forest around him, once a place of solitude and survival, now held the memory of courage, trust, and the unexpected bond between a trapper and an Apache girl. The forest edge was thick with shadows as Samuel and the Apache girl carefully approached the outer boundary of her village. The sun was low in the sky, painting the trees in shades of red and gold, and a soft wind carried the sounds of the evening, distant calls of birds returning to their nests, the rustle of leaves and the faint murmur of the village in the distance. The girl's small hand trembled slightly in Samuel's, not out of fear of him anymore, but from anticipation and worry about what awaited her at home. For days, she had been away from her family, caught in a trap and saved by a stranger. The thought of returning should have filled her with joy, but she felt anxious. What if her parents were angry she had wandered so far? What if the elders mistrusted Samuel, an outsider who had spent time with her in the forest? She walked a few steps behind Samuel, letting him lead, trusting him to guide her safely through the final stretch. Samuel noticed her tension and spoke softly, trying to ease her worries. "Stay calm," he whispered. "Everything will be all right. I'll make sure nothing bad happens." He crouched slightly so his eyes were level with hers, giving a gentle smile. "You'll be safe soon. Your family is waiting." The girl nodded, taking a deep breath, feeling reassured by his calm presence. As they moved closer, they could hear voices more clearly. A few villagers had spotted movement in the trees and were whispering among themselves. Some held small tools, and the way they watched the forest suggested caution rather than immediate hostility. Samuel slowed his pace and motioned for the girl to stay close and move quietly. He had learned from experience that any sudden actions could cause alarm, and he wanted her to remain calm and safe. The girl's heart pounded as they stepped into the clearing just outside the village. She could see her family among the villagers, looking worried and tense. Her mother's eyes scanned the trees frantically, and her father's stance was rigid, a mix of concern and caution. Samuel paused a few steps away, giving them space, and knelt slightly to appear less threatening. His hands remained visible and relaxed, showing that he meant no harm. The villagers approached carefully, speaking in low voices. Samuel could not understand their words, but the tone was cautious, almost questioning. The girl stepped forward and called out softly in her language, explaining that Samuel had saved her from a trap and guided her safely home. The villagers' expressions shifted from suspicion to cautious relief as they listened. Her parents rushed to embrace her, their concern melting into tears of joy. Samuel stayed back, allowing the family to reunite, but he remained vigilant. He knew that some villagers might still view him with mistrust. Just then, a group of Apache scouts arrived, moving silently from the forest edge. Their presence caused a sudden tension in the air. The girl froze beside Samuel, her eyes wide with fear. The scouts were trained to observe outsiders carefully, and their expressions were serious, assessing the situation. Samuel remained calm, raising his hands slightly to indicate he meant no harm. The scouts stopped a few feet away, their eyes narrowing as they observed him. Samuel spoke softly, explaining as best as he could that he had found the girl trapped in his snares and had guided her home. He used gestures and careful movements, showing that his actions were intended to help, not to harm. The girl watched closely, feeling a mix of fear and hope, trusting Samuel to handle this delicate moment. The tension was thick. The scouts whispered among themselves in their language, and the girl's parents stood protectively by her side. Samuel kept his movements slow and deliberate, showing respect and patience. Slowly, One of the scouts stepped forward, examining the girl, and then gestured to the others. After a tense pause, they seemed to accept Samuel's explanation, and the group relaxed slightly. The girl exhaled quietly, her trust in Samuel deepening as she saw how he remained calm under pressure and protected her from potential conflict. The girl's parents approached Samuel, speaking in their language and gesturing toward him. Samuel nodded respectfully, answering with gestures that conveyed honesty and care. He showed them that he had only acted out of concern for the girl's safety. After a few moments of careful discussion, her parents and the scouts seemed satisfied. The initial suspicion had melted into gratitude, and the girl's family welcomed Samuel with cautious warmth. As the sun dipped further, casting long shadows across the village, the girl's family invited Samuel to sit near the edge of the clearing. He accepted, grateful for their trust. The girl sat beside her parents, occasionally glancing at Samuel with a small smile, the bond between them clear even without words. The villagers, observing the scene, began to relax, realizing that this outsider had acted with kindness, patience, and courage. That evening, Samuel shared small stories of their journey through the forest, explaining the events in simple gestures and words. The girl laughed softly as he mimicked the movements of animals they had encountered, a rabbit hopping, a bird fluttering, and even a squirrel scrambling up a tree. The villagers smiled, appreciating his effort to communicate and the gentle care he had shown. As darkness fell, the village elders approached, speaking with authority. They asked questions about how the girl had been found and Samuel's intentions. Samuel responded calmly, demonstrating sincerity and respect. The elders listened carefully, their expressions serious but not hostile. They recognized that Samuel had acted with honesty and had shown courage and patience in protecting the girl. After a thoughtful pause, they nodded, signaling acceptance. Samuel had earned their respect, not through words alone but through his actions and calm demeanor. The girl, now safe and surrounded by her family, began to speak openly about her experiences with Samuel. She described the fear she had felt when trapped, the kindness Samuel had shown, and the lessons he had taught her about moving quietly, observing nature, and understanding the forest. Her parents listened intently, their gratitude evident. They realized that this young trapper, though an outsider, had protected their daughter and shown a level of integrity and care that deserved respect. Samuel stayed the night in the village, offered a simple meal and a place to rest by the edge of the clearing. The girl brought him a blanket and some food, small gestures that reflected her gratitude and the growing bond between them. Samuel accepted them humbly, understanding that these simple exchanges strengthened trust and respect between him and the girl's family. As night deepened, the girl's parents shared quiet words with their daughter, praising her courage and calmness throughout the ordeal. The girl smiled, feeling proud yet grateful for Samuel's presence. She had learned that fear could be overcome with patience, that trust could grow even in challenging situations, and that kindness from a stranger could make a life-changing difference. Samuel watched the village settle into quiet. Children slept, fires burned low, and the forest beyond the village was calm. He thought about the day's events, the girl trapped in the snare, the careful steps through the forest, the tension with the scouts, and the eventual acceptance by the villagers. Every moment had required patience, understanding, and respect. He realized that true courage was not just about facing danger, but also about remaining calm, showing care, and acting with integrity. Before resting himself, Samuel took a moment to speak quietly with the girl. He told her to remember the lessons she had learned, to trust her instincts, and to always value kindness and patience. She nodded, understanding the depth of his words. Though their journey together had been short, the experiences they shared would remain with both of them forever. As the first stars appeared in the night sky, Samuel reflected on the bond that had formed. Fear had turned into trust, suspicion had turned into gratitude, and danger had turned into safety. The girl had learned to see a stranger not as a threat, but as a protector and teacher. Samuel had learned the impact of patience, empathy, and courage. Together they had navigated fear, uncertainty, and the unknown, forming a connection that bridged the gap between cultures and experiences. The night passed quietly, filled with a calm sense of accomplishment and relief. Samuel knew that when morning came, the girl would be safely with her family, and the village would have a story to remember, the story of a young trapper who had saved a girl, respected her culture, and taught lessons of trust, courage, and kindness. The girl's eyes, bright even in the moonlight, reflected the safety and gratitude she felt, a reminder that understanding and patience could change the course of lives in ways both small and profound. The morning sun rose gently over the village, painting the earth in soft golden light. Birds called from the treetops, and a light breeze rustled the leaves of the trees surrounding the settlement. Samuel awoke near the edge of the clearing, careful not to disturb the sleeping girl or her family. The night had been quiet, peaceful, and filled with a sense of safety that had been absent only a few days before. He felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that he had done everything he could to protect the young girl and guide her home safely. The girl stirred beside her parents, blinking her eyes open and stretching slowly. She looked at Samuel and offered a small, warm smile. That simple gesture conveyed more than words could express: gratitude, trust, and a sense of relief. She had learned through the past few days that not all strangers were dangerous, that care and patience could turn fear into safety, and that kindness could appear in the most unexpected places. Samuel returned her smile, feeling a bond that had grown stronger with every step of their journey. The villagers were beginning to stir, and Samuel observed them from a respectful distance. Children emerged from their homes, playing quietly near the edges of the clearing, while adults tended to their daily chores. Though cautious at first, they now accepted Samuel as a friend and protector. The girl's parents came to him, speaking in their language, and gestured with warm smiles and hands held in gratitude. Samuel nodded humbly, responding with gestures of respect. He knew that actions had spoken louder than words, and that trust had been earned through his careful guidance and patient behavior. The girl's mother handed Samuel a small bundle of food: dried meat, bread, and some fruit from the village's stores. She smiled, and Samuel accepted it graciously. Then her father offered a simple gift: a handmade cloak for the cold nights in the forest. Samuel felt honored. Though he was a stranger who had only entered their lives briefly, the warmth of their welcome touched him deeply. The girl stood beside her parents, her eyes bright with happiness and pride, knowing that Samuel had not only saved her life, but had shown her the meaning of care, courage, and trust. Samuel spent the morning helping the village with small tasks, as the girl's parents insisted. He mended a small fence, gathered firewood, and helped children understand basic tracking skills from the forest's edge. The girl watched him closely, occasionally joining in, laughing as he demonstrated careful movements and the ways to observe nature without causing harm. She learned not just survival skills, but the value of patience and respect for life, lessons Samuel had passed on through example. Throughout the day, villagers approached Samuel, asking questions about the journey and the forest beyond their homes. He answered as best as he could, using gestures, simple words, and demonstrations. The girl translated where she could, helping bridge the gap between Samuel and the villagers. She explained how he had saved her from the trap and guided her home, how he had remained calm when scouts approached, and how he had taught her to observe and respect the forest. Each story reinforced the village's growing trust and appreciation for Samuel. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, Samuel and the girl walked together along the outskirts of the village, showing each other the small streams, rocks, and trees they had noticed during their journey. The girl pointed to markings on trees, demonstrating what she had learned about observing the forest. Samuel nodded with approval, smiling at her attentiveness and curiosity. He saw how her confidence had grown. She no longer moved in fear. She moved with awareness, respect, and quiet courage. By evening, the village gathered around a small fire near the clearing to share stories. Samuel spoke gently of the forest, the lessons it held, and the importance of listening, observing, and moving carefully. The girl sat beside her parents, sharing her experiences and laughter. She described her fear when trapped, the relief she felt when Samuel arrived, and the lessons he had taught her. The villagers listened intently, inspired by the courage of both Samuel and the young girl. The stories were simple but powerful, demonstrating the impact of trust, patience, and understanding. Night fell, and the fire's glow painted warm colors on the faces of the villagers. Samuel looked around, noticing how the girl had grown more comfortable, her posture relaxed and her eyes shining with confidence. She spoke freely now, laughing and sharing details of their journey that she had been too frightened to share before. Samuel felt proud. He had not only guided her safely home, but had helped her discover her own strength and courage. The girl's parents invited Samuel to stay for dinner. They prepared a simple meal and the girl assisted, offering small pieces of food to Samuel. She laughed softly as he tried to balance too many items on a plate, and Samuel laughed along, enjoying the warmth and simplicity of the moment. The bond between them, once built in fear and uncertainty, had grown into something deeper: mutual respect, understanding, and gratitude. After the meal, Samuel and the girl took a quiet walk along the edge of the village. The forest beyond was dark, but Samuel explained the signs of animals, the paths of water, and the safest ways to move in the night. The girl listened closely, her curiosity sparking, her confidence growing. She realized that the world beyond her village was vast and sometimes dangerous, but with knowledge, patience, and trust, it could also be understood and respected. Samuel spoke softly about the importance of kindness, courage, and respect. Even when things seem scary, he said, helping someone and staying calm can make all the difference. Trust and patience are stronger than fear. The girl nodded, absorbing every word. She thought of the day she had been trapped, the fear she had felt, and how Samuel's calm and care had changed everything. She understood now that fear could be faced and trust could be built, and that the kindness of one person could transform a moment of danger into one of safety and learning. As the night deepened, Samuel prepared to leave the village. The girl's parents stood by the clearing, their expressions filled with gratitude and respect. The girl ran forward, placing a small bundle of food in his hands along with a piece of cloth to wrap himself for the cold nights ahead. She hugged him briefly, a simple gesture of deep appreciation and affection. Samuel smiled, ruffling her hair gently, and promised to return only if the family wished it. The girl watched him walk toward the edge of the forest, her heart filled with gratitude and admiration. She realized that her life had been changed in a single day. A stranger had saved her, taught her, and helped her see that courage and kindness were stronger than fear. Samuel glanced back one last time, seeing her bright eyes, her confident stance, and her warm smile. He knew that she would continue to grow strong, wise, and brave, carrying the lessons they had shared into her future. As Samuel disappeared into the forest, the girl turned to her parents, speaking excitedly about everything she had learned. They listened with smiles, proud of her courage and grateful for the trapper who had protected her. The villagers gathered around, sharing stories and discussing the lessons learned. The tale of the young trapper and the Apache girl spread quickly, becoming a story of trust, courage, and the unexpected bonds that could form even between strangers. The girl stood quietly near the fire that night, reflecting on the events of the past days. She had been scared, trapped, and uncertain, yet she had discovered the strength of patience, trust, and kindness. Samuel had taught her more than survival skills. He had shown her how to face fear with courage, how to respect others, and how understanding could create bonds stronger than suspicion. She felt a quiet pride in herself and deep gratitude for Samuel's actions. For Samuel, the journey had been life-changing as well. He had set out as a simple trapper, moving quietly through the forest, but he had left with something far more valuable: the knowledge that care, patience, and courage could create bonds across cultures and experiences. The trust of the girl and her family, earned through action rather than words, was a reminder that even in uncertain circumstances, integrity and kindness could guide one through. The night passed quietly, with the village safe, the girl confident, and Samuel returning to his life in the forest. Though they would part ways, the lessons they had shared and the bond they had formed would remain. The girl would grow with confidence and courage, carrying the memory of a stranger who had saved her life, and Samuel would continue his work in the wilderness, knowing that one act of care could transform fear into trust and danger into safety. As the stars twinkled above, the forest around the village seemed peaceful, almost magical. The girl lay down to sleep, feeling safe for the first time since she had been trapped, her heart light with gratitude and hope. Samuel moved quietly through the trees, reflecting on the power of trust, the importance of patience, and the lasting impact of simple acts of kindness. Both had learned lessons that would remain with them forever: that courage could be quiet, that trust could be earned slowly, and that one person's care could change the life of another in ways beyond imagination.